Recent media reports have flagged disruptions in the global meat markets, particularly the U.S. beef market. This essentially means that if the disruptions in various meat plants persist for some time and spill over into the global market, South Africa will not be spared from the price impact, particularly on poultry products. Given the significant 33% market share of these countries in the global meat trade, if these processing plant closures spread and they remain closed for a prolonged period, there are fears of a global meat shortage and potentially an uptick in prices. So how will the South African market be affected? Let's ask Casey Delport, who is an investment analyst at Anchor Capital. Thank you very much for coming through, Casey.
Good afternoon, Colin, and good afternoon to the viewers.
Right. Please paint a picture for us on how the South African meat production industry has been impacted by the disruption and closure of the processing units.
Well, as you mentioned, globally there's been a significant amount of disruption as employees within the huge abattoirs, especially within the United States, have become infected and they've had to close down abattoirs. It's particularly prominent, like I said, within the US, Brazil, Ireland, and Canada, where they've had lost about quite a great deal of capacity. About a third of the US pork capacity, for instance, is down. The reason why it's hitting them particularly hard is that the abattoirs are built very differently to ours. They tend to have very large-scale abattoirs, where in South Africa we tend to have smaller ones. So when they have to shut down to protect employees, that has a huge impact on supply. Whereas in South Africa, abattoirs are a lot smaller, so it doesn't have too much of a knockdown effect. But luckily, South Africa is a lot more protected from this as opposed to the US, especially within our beef trade. 2014, we have actually been a net exporter of beef, which essentially means that within South Africa we have plenty of supplies. There's no need for anyone to panic. Our shelves will remain full. And as I mentioned before, abattoirs function very differently. It doesn't mean, however, that we will be spared any sort of knock-on effect. We do, at the end of the day, still export or import around 20% of our poultry supplies. So we will feel some sort of spillover effects, especially as market disruption continues, especially if it goes on unabated for a prolonged period of time. However, this will be very minor, and there's absolutely no reason for any consumers, at least within South Africa, to impact. We have plenty of meat supplies in the country.
On the supply side of things, how would farmers be affected when it comes to, I would imagine, the animals that are not moving in as far as auctions are concerned? Would there be now a case whereby, say, for example, the South African scenario where there's a lockdown and animals are not being transported so that they can be slaughtered in order to supply the meat market? Is there going to be congestion that speaks to the shortage of the supply of meat in the butcheries, so to say?
Well, luckily under stage 4 now, the whole of the agricultural sector is allowed to open and work pretty much very openly. In stage 5, there would have been a slight bit of congestion, but that has opened now. Abattoirs are functioning as normal. Transport is continuing abated, and there's still a good transport. There was still a slight outbreak of foot and mouth disease at the end of the year. However, that has since cleared. There is a slight uptick in swine fever that has come into the Eastern Cape. However, that has been contained, and disruption at this point remains minimal. It's business as usual.
Right. So when it comes to occupational health and safety standards in as far as abattoirs are concerned, this could be a very sensitive area in as far as the transmission of the virus is concerned. And this is not actually a new norm in as far as what the owners, operators, and the workers at abattoirs are concerned. With the advent of trying to heighten awareness and compliance with these strict measures, what can be done so that everybody can be convinced that we are having a safe meat market in South Africa?
I think it's important to remember that the industry, even before the sort of virus hit us, was always had extremely high protocols when it came to safety and hygiene, not just of employees themselves, but of meat products. So all the industries, having spoken to sort of key stakeholders within the industry, they've simply heightened these restrictions, increased education and awareness. As I can't stress enough that beforehand, employees were extremely well educated on hygiene protocols and sort of regulations going forward. However, companies have heightened this. I know they have released high-level sort of education programs, released manuals and understanding in multiple of the languages here in South Africa. And as I mentioned before, it's sort of carrying on sort of unabated. So far, we've had no outbreaks within our industry. I know that all employees are screened and tested before they go within the abattoirs. And I can tell the viewers I have full confidence within the various abattoirs and industries in the country.
So how will the supply and demand of meat products be affected in as far as the South African ports and borders are concerned, given that most of the time we've been hearing like there's a case of COVID-19 in Botswana as a result of one truck driver who crossed into that country because of trying to ease down the lockdown regulations. And of course, on the export side of things, is there going to be an uptick in as far as the supply of stock and the uptick in prices is concerned?
Well, it depends. Again, you have to look at it by an industry per sort of industry case. At the moment, like I say, we import about 20% of poultry products, so any disruptions there would have a bit of effect. With regards to the pork industry, we imported around 6%, but that's mostly rib cuts coming in from across elsewhere. Most of our production does stay internally and goes to the likes of released regionally within Namibia, Botswana, and up further towards the east of Africa. There has been some congestion in our ports, looking more sort of international exports on that side. However, from what I understand, that the lags sort of have been cleared and it is carrying on as normal. With regards to your question on consumer demand, that's an interesting one, and there's been some strange sort of trends coming through to analyze. It's a bit of a double-edged sword at the moment. Naturally, you see an increase in much more fresh produce as consumers within South Africa become aware of the health implications and the need to look after oneself, especially now, with good, healthy meals and produce. However, on the other side, as the regulations continue and as our economy continues to struggle, households are becoming under increased financial pressure and naturally are having to tighten their belts. So you see a decrease in more of your luxury sort of food items. Naturally, the likes of pork and that will be first to go. However, you see an increase in your more affordable sort of protein products. If you look at the poultry industry, for instance, you have seen a decrease in the demand for fresh cuts because that tends to be a little bit more expensive. However, there's been a massive increase in demand for your frozen portions, which tend to be a lot more affordable for the average household.
Right. Thank you very much for coming through. Casey Delport is the investment analyst at Anchor Capital, talking to us about the impacts of COVID-19 on agricultural exports, of course, during the lockdown as the restrictions are being lifted and we are slowly progressing towards level 3 now. I'm going to take a break, and when we return, the flow returns with the program. Stay with us.